Preface. I can state without equivocation that you can't figure out the Torah unless you come in through the science of it. Doug was a member of the Geological Society of America and studied the causes of the ice ages and the geomagnetic reversals since 1971. Doug was the first person to develop an information theory of existence called the theory of multidimensional reality. In November 1977 and November 1999, Doug funded and led 2 geological expeditions to the Sinai Desert, where he discovered the real Mount Sinai and all the altars Moses described in Exodus. In April of 2002, Doug's son went with him on an expedition to trace the Exodus route that Moses described. Doug had already found the crossing area during his second expedition, as well as a 6-foot crude stone obelisk that he believes Aaron built when Moses went off to Baal-zephon to get gold out of the spent gold mine and carry it off to Mount Sinai. I'm also very proud to say that I'm the first person since Moses, says Doug, that has set eyes on the real Abraham's actual sacrificial altar. Moses had concealed it inside the sacrificial altar he had built on the top of Mount Sinai. Doug was the first person in 2,600 years to discover the model that created the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet. And he might be the first person since Moses to understand the philosophy behind it. With all that said, Doug says, if you are a theologian, a rabbi, a minister, priest, or university professor, please read this book with an open mind. You're going to learn things that you were not taught in school because the teachers didn't know. Doug is writing other books, and I'll talk about those later, which will cover information from Abraham until the fall of the first temple, including the actual Exodus route with all the evidence to prove it. There's some endnotes that I'll read here. The following books have the progression of how the theory was developed. His first book, Reality Revealed, The Theory of Multidimensional Reality, was written in 1977. I have a copy of this book on PDF given to me by Doug, which I'll be happy to share with you. However, the book was like $300 and there wasn't one printed, so Doug gave me that one. The second book was God's Day of Judgment, which I have right here, I think. Yeah, here. The Real Cause of Global Warming, which he wrote in 2007. And then the last book was his developed theory called The Theory of Multidimensional Reality, and I've got that right here too, although I'm not quite sure where it is right now, but I do have it. Okay, so Doug did say that his intention was to write for the scientists and the professors, and I just happened to find him when I was looking for information relative to the Great Year. I had learned about the Great Year from Randall Carlson and taken that class, and through looking for rocks and trying to uncover some truth, I found a catastrophe that took place in 350 AD that wasn't anywhere on anybody's timeline in all the books. And so I was very frustrated with our written history. I found Randall Carlson, and so I've been trying to connect with him. I tried to get Doug and Randall together, of no avail, but see how I get off. Okay. The Hebrew Scriptures are the most commented and researched books in history. We all know that, right? You'd think that if there were secrets or codes in the Torah, that someone would have discovered them and researched them and published them. But that's not the truth of it. Similar to when I started uncovering this, I thought, Cindy, who do you think you are? But so many people don't ask questions. They just take it like a sheep. That's why I hate sheep. We need to take responsibility. It's like, let the buyer beware. You know, the Constitution reminded us, that's one thing they said. They tried to make it so every department held the other accountable. But the Bible has no accountability. Really. Sorry. People won't even look now. Okay. So, students in secular universities and in religious seminaries are not taught the code systems. They might be shown some of the ancient stuff, but they aren't told that these codes are part of ancient literature. Every now and then, someone will let it slip out or have a favorite student or that kind of thing, but it is not common knowledge, not whatsoever. And there's a reason for that, unfortunately. This book will cover 10, I'm going to see if this is recording. Oh, it is. What do you know? Okay. This book will cover the 10 different code systems used by Moses and also many of the higher priests later. Some of the code systems were lost after the fall of the first temple, and a few lingered around, but no one had any desire to show these codes to the sheep. You can be sure of that. Some of the code system was knowledge from the distant past. A lot of knowledge was forgotten or deliberately lost over the 26 years. The current rabbis and past Jewish priests after the exiles were not taught the code systems that Moses created. The prophets after Moses used some of the same code systems in their writings. Baruch was the last prophet who wrote as Ezekiel, Joel, and some of the Psalms, but he took many of the secrets to the grave, including the location of Mount Sinai and the cave of Machpelah. The rabbinic scholars say the Torah is written like a woven garment. Clues are scattered all throughout the Torah and some of the books of the prophets. Doug agrees, but thinks that a better analogy is an onion. The onion, I should have gotten one because there's one right over there, but he uses this picture. And we all know an onion. I've used this analogy for being empathetic with someone who's grieving or needs to talk. When we act as an echo for what they need to say, we're peeling an onion, and you allow that person to feel safe enough to get down to that inner core that's opaque and tender, and where the seed is, the life comes. So Doug's saying that the analogy of the Torah is very much like an onion. Under the thin, translucent skin, he says, are multiple layers that make up the body, which is the part we eat. We don't eat the thin skin because it's just the covering of the edible vegetable inside. At the center base of the onion is the heart of the onion that generates the roots, the outer layers, the stalk and flower. That's where the genetic material represents the onion. The thin skin is a poor representation of the onion. The outer layers of the onion are akin to separate, secret-coded stories Moses put in to the surface story. These stories are about important subjects and events that Moses was trying to convey over the expanse of time, which makes absolute sense. You have to stop and think a minute, that we know that the civilization before us was highly advanced. You can just look at what they made, and I looked at the bridge this morning that's been there since Rome, and nothing we make lasts a lifetime. So, I lost my train of thought. Okay, I'm just going to go back to where we were. So, that's a very interesting way to look at history. It's layers of information based on importance, and the deeper we get, the more important the message. But we can't get deep without the key to unlock the puzzle. And I like that as an analogy, a puzzle, because there's always going to be the last missing piece. I doubt the puzzle will always ever come completely together, but each piece really is an important part. So Moses' coded stories fill in a lot of missing and confusing Hebrew history and explain why the Torah is not written like any other book. Some of the coded stories can not be discovered and understood unless you know geology, geophysics, astronomy, and other hardcore science subjects. Isn't this ironic that we are told that those things don't matter? When you become a Christian, I can't speak to anything else, but I can speak to it because I did it for 33 damn years. And I can tell you that nothing is encouraged to know. You're pushed away from astrology or numerology or anything that might interrupt the narrative of this crap. Not that this is crap, but of the Jesus hoax BS. I'm not going to do that, I promise. Some of these stories were about Moses' family and what they did. Others are about the Exodus trip, which I've wondered if it really happened, but I guess Doug says yes, so I'm with him right now. I would not. Well, I have argued with him, and I would if he were here, and I sure wish he were. Okay. He uncovered who put important items into the family burial cave, who bought Joseph, Joseph's name in Egypt, what he did there, the location of Mount Sinai and the family burial cave. Moses also told the congregation, Moses also gave us the greatest secret in the Torah, how people can survive the geomagnetic reversal and the Ice Age. I'm sorry to have to mention that. That's how I found all this. And it's quite difficult to take, but it's truth. And no matter what we tell ourselves, it's the truth that we will live. All religion was just meant to explain the cataclysms and floods and stories that we don't like and need to make sense of. Okay, Doug uses the word surface story for what Moses did, and that's it. Moses told us this in Exodus 32. And Moses turned and went down from the mount with the 2 tablets of the testimony in his hand, tablets that were written on both their sides. On the one side and on the other were they written. And the tablets were the work of God, and the writing was the writing of God, graven upon the tablets. He was told he could not add or subtract any of the letters on the 2 tablets, so he was stuck and had to invent a variety of code systems in order to tell a coherent story. The seed of the Torah. Finally, we come to the center of the onion, which would be analogous to the model that created the 22 letters. That's my favorite part of all this. The 22 letters are 22 views of a toroidal wave form. I had the most fun learning about this, and I've been working on some experiments to see if I can create a word form like Doug did. He had a toroidal, and I wanted to ask him for it, but I never did. But anyway. Oh dear, another call. We're just going to ignore that. Okay, I'm going to get better at this. The waveform, now this is exciting, is a modified square wave, modified by the natural logarithm. Ironically, once you discovered what formed the alphabet, the surface story disappears, except for the Garden of Eden story, because Moses was telling us who put this very high technology into the cave, into the burial cave. It's all secret notes. And I know where I was when I got mixed up. The highly advanced civilization before us, who knows? I mean, that's where all the Anunnaki stories come from. We know that the Sumerians and the Akkadians, they dug up the whole Sumerian, whole deal, archaeology, and I can't remember what year, I think the 60s or 70s maybe, and found the creation story, the Epic of Gilgamesh, and about Marduk, and it really helped because all these Assyrian tablets were found, and it was even found out that the Assyrian language is what was used to communicate with Egypt. There was an overpopulation of Syrians at the time, so we learned a lot. They learned a lot of information during that uncovering. So let's see where we are. Okay, the lettering, I can't wait. I wish we could do that now, but we got to stay on target. Okay, so we've arrived at the point where the mystery of the Torah begins. We are faced with a riddle. How could Moses be the author of the Torah while admitting that he did not create the design of the letters and the sequence of the symbols or the words? Rabbis and scholars ignore this statement, and they assume that he just wrote the whole thing and wrote out a working copy of the Torah on a sheepskin and placed it next to the Ark of the Covenant. The second set of stone tablets was then placed inside the Ark for safekeeping. The Torah and what it actually is cannot be discovered and understood unless you know science. And on top of that, it takes a philosophy of science totally different than what's taught in our university. Only with the informational theory of existence, like Doug's theory of multidimensional reality, that's the only way you can see this thing. And it reconciles all science and all spirit. It reconciles why everything is a cycle, why every number connects, why sound is the music of me and you. It wraps it all up. No wonder they didn't want us to find this part. Makes me so damn mad. Okay, back on track. Some of the subjects we must understand, and that's why it's taken me 5 years to share this, is because I've had to learn physics, geology, geometry. I'm telling you, I've been learning. I've been a learning girl. Physics, optics, computer sciences, programming, and electronics. Once you discover the model that created the 22 letters and understand what you're dealing with, then you'll begin to realize why the Orthodox tradition is correct in stating that the Torah can only be compared to itself and not to any other book. And then you'll realize why the late Bronze Age people could not possibly produce such an alphabet. The background of the Torah. Let me check my timing here. 22 minutes. The Orthodox Jewish tradition says that Moses brought the gift of writing to mankind, but the Hebrew priests had no way to prove it. The only place in the Torah that references writing is Exodus 32:15, which was quoted earlier. The quote clearly tells us that the letter designs were unknown to the people before Moses unknown to the people before Moses bought the 2 tablets out of Mount Sinai. It also states that Moses, before 1306 BCE, did not create the letter sequence. There were only 2 forms of written communication at the time of Moses: cuneiform and Egyptian hieroglyphics. Now, as an aside, we know that that's not completely true because there are other civilizations, but I think what Doug's pointing to is this area and the area that the Bible is referencing. There were 2 forms of written communication. I said that. After the Exodus, writing came into being. The Jewish priests could never prove that Moses brought down the skill of writing because the only way it could be proven was through science and the theory of multidimensional reality. That's the key to why Doug was able to uncover all this. It was a paradigm, a concept, a lens, and everyone looks through the wrong one. What is known about the Hebrew alphabet in the Torah? The current day Hebrew alphabet is not like the original. Doesn't look like what Moses saw. No copy of the original Torah writing style from before the destruction of the temple in 587 BCE exists today. Doug believed that during the Babylonian captivity, Baruch, the grandson of Jeremiah, redesigned the alphabet to the form we have today. There are 304, 805 letters in the Torah, And that's what Moses had to work with. So he was trying to convey an alphabet to a future civilization with a limited amount of letters, and he didn't have vowels. And so that's why the surface stories were created, and that's why there are so many numbers, because the numbers tell us through code. Okay. So once you understand how Moses received the Torah and how he wrote the biblical story, you begin to understand what a challenge he was up against. Moses didn't have the normal tools that we do when we write a story. He sure doesn't have a word processor, right? The Hebrews spoke a form of Canaanite and Hittite languages, sometimes incorporating Egyptian words into their vocabulary, and now we know that there was a big Assyrian influence. The first thing Moses did was assign vowel. The first thing he had to do was assign vowel. The first thing he had to do was assign values to 20 of the 22 letters or symbols. We don't know if he used any vowel notations as today. If he did not, that might be why they used singers that memorized the Torah so that they would know how to pronounce the words, where the word endings were. Because Joseph created the spelling of the vocabulary, the sentence structure at the same time, and that's all he had with which to create coherent biblical stories. It had to be difficult, and we have to conclude that it took him a long time in front of the ark getting God's help writing the stories and the vocabulary. In Exodus chapters 6, 18, 21 through 23, and 32 through 36, things are out of sequence. There are other Torah stories that are also out of sequence, and the reason is he was not trying to give you any chronology. He was trying to show much, much more. He had to have had some blocks of symbols that were impossible to fit into a coherent, cohesive storyline. So like if you were making up a crossword puzzle and you had to fit everything in, that's what he had to do basically. But he was very, very limited. Okay, so the most important thing was that he not change anything from the directive, right? Computers are based on obedience. One method Moses used was creating words from equidistant skip patterns in the text. Researchers and authors found those skip patterns. I'm going to show you, there's a good picture here. Am I doing this? Okay, so if you can see that, they would write stories out, and then every so many letters, there would be numbers to give you the code of what, like a Morse code. Dot, dot, skip, 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 dot, dash, right? And so that's one of the codes. Some authors attempted to show that the skip patterns foretell the future. Doug doesn't believe that because there's so much flexibility of the letters and vowel structure in the language. There are too many permutations and combinations one can create with the letters for someone to say for certain that a proper name or other words are in proximity to each other. Those authors may have thought that they could foretell the future because one of the Jewish legends states that all the words and all the actions of all the worlds are in the Torah. But they didn't realize the legend is only a clue to what the Torah is. What's significant are the words found with short to medium skips in the same area as the biblical surface stories talk about the same subject. So that reconciliation of the skips and the words. For instance, in the Garden of Eden section, researchers found the names of over 16 trees and plant species. So in the story, Adam is naming the plants and animals. Moses may have chosen to place the plant names in the story because he was doing the same thing Adam was commanded to do. 40 years after retrieving the 2 Torah tablets, Moses had finished writing most of the biblical surface story of the 5 books, which is called the Torah. He had created a written working copy of the text that appeared on both tablets. This account appears in Deuteronomy 31:16. And it came to pass, when Moses had made an end of writing the words of this law in a book until they were finished, that Moses commanded the Levites, which bear the ark of the covenant of the Lord, saying, Take this book of the law and put it in the side of the ark of the covenant of the Lord your God, that it may be there for a witness against thee. Academia's argument against the Torah and Moses. The argument most of academia is that Moses and Exodus were mythical and that the Torah was written over 700 years ago and that Deuteronomy was written by Jeremiah. That way, they don't have to think too hard to try and understand anything beyond the thin skin, which is all we ever get. Even when you study it for 33 years. I'm not going to go down that road. What I have learned or heard from professors is that in their profession, if it had not been found, it didn't exist, basically. They're not the only ones that believe this. Some religious groups also believe in historical relativism. Jewish and Christians do, and teach that Moses and the Exodus story are just fictional. But what those scholars either forgot, never taught, or ignored is that Deuteronomy was a lost book of the Torah, but was found in the temple during the reign of King Josiah. Jeremiah's given name appears in 2 Chronicles, 2 Kings, and 15 times in the book of Jeremiah. Is as the scribe Shaphan. Okay, so they're saying that he is Shaphan. But of course the scholars never read that in the textbooks. Now this is very interesting, and I have a whole board there to talk about names because that's a critical part of all this. But we're in a good place. I'm sorry, haven't read this in a while, and I don't want to just wing it and pretend I know it enough not to follow this. Okay, so what the scholars forgot or were never taught or ignored is that Deuteronomy was a lost book and was found in the temple during the reign of King Josiah. Jeremiah's given name appears in 2 Chronicles, 2 Kings, and 15 times in the book of Jeremiah as the scribe Shaphan. But of course, these scholars never read that in their textbooks. The priests had 3 different names. Key. The name when they were born, the priestly name when they became a priest, and finally a prophet's name if they were the eldest son of the high priest and their father died. But the key thing to know is that these priests could use the prophet's name to publish what they wrote while in front of the ark, so that the most powerful nations would not suspect how long they were using the ark to communicate with God. Shall I read it again? I'm going to do that for you. Okay, so we know that so much of what is included in the Bible from the ancients is reality. And so much isn't. And that is our challenge, isn't it? So with that said, Jeremiah was also Shaphan, S-H-A-P-H-A-N. So what they're saying is that priests knew that, but they didn't know why they knew that. And that the naming thing is something that most people don't understand. But just from this point itself, just the fact that he was Jeremiah, right? And he was Shaphan, and they were using this to make sure that their enemies didn't know whether they were in possession of the ark or not. Does that make sense? So during the 3 expeditions to the Sinai Desert in November of 1997, 1999, and April 2002, Doug discovered on the top of the real Mount Sinai the sacrificial altar, the platform where the ark stood, the platforms where the candles stand and bread stand stood, in the exact position and distance that Moses describes in Exodus. South of the hill were Aaron's altar, the platform where the golden calf was, the first altar Moses built at the southwestern base of the hill. Located on the south side of the base of the hill were the 12 piles of rocks, where the 12 standards were placed during the 1999 expedition, when he found real Abraham's altar concealed inside the sacrificial altar. During the 2002 expedition, he found the crossing on the Bay of Suez, where Aaron had built a stone obelisk measuring 6 foot 2 inches tall. And he found the Battle of Amalek, including the place where Moses sat on the ledge atop a 35-foot rise. Also, he found this right south of the rise, the battlefield full of flint spears and arrowheads. Doug, I'm going to read this last part of the chapter. So I would like to remind those academics and theologians that rather teach social justice and historical relativism, that fictional characters do not leave physical evidence behind. Think about it as you read a small part of the evidence I present within this book. The full description of the expeditions will be covered in another book dedicated to the Exodus. The important part here is that the model of the Hebrew alphabet unlocks what the Torah actually is and what really is going on in the story, especially about how Moses talked to God. There's no way anyone can figure out what the Torah is without understanding the sciences that he created. Okay, in notes, a full explanation is found in my book, God's Day of Judgment, The Real Cause of Global Warming, in chapter 4, and my other book, The Creation of the Hebrew Alphabet. 2. The basics for the theory of multidimensional reality is this. The universe is the product of information, and the matter world is created by that information. It also states that our universe is a synchronistic system, which Doug named the Diehold. The complete explanation is listed in Doug's previous book, God's Day of Judgment, The Real Cause of Warming, Global Warming, in chapter 3, and The Theory of Multidimensional Reality. And as I said, I have those books, so I'll be looking at them to follow this up. I've already read them a number of times, but I'm constantly going back. 3. The Exodus took place in 3406 BCE, and it was about 11 months after the Exodus that Moses presented the 2 tablets to the congregation. 4. Michael Drosnin in the Bible Code, 1997, and Dr. Jeffrey Satinover, MD, Cracking the Bible Code, are 2 other books that you can verify this information. Number 5. This book is only going to focus on the 10 code systems Moses used in writing the surface story. I covered the model that created the Hebrew alphabet in chapter 4 of my 2007 book, God's Day of Judgment and the Real Cause of Global Warming. I'll be dedicating another book on the model of the Hebrew alphabet after this book, which I have here. The Hebrew alphabet is an important story by itself and covers several fields in physics, electronics, and deserves its own book to explain the whole story. And the next part will be learning Hebrew large and small numbering, which is pretty much fun. It's like a puzzle. I hope you enjoyed this, and I will get better. Thanks for being with me, because truth is freedom. We could use some today.